because he is the leader here. He is the chair of the church council. His partner here is a Filipino, Joel, and we are so blessed that they found this church and they found the church and they decided to stay. Even though now they have to drive from Nashua, New Hampshire to come here. So winter, spring, summer, fall, they are with us, and we are so blessed to have him be with us today. So, Jmillerrealtv. Oh, that's right. He got promoted. All right?
I just take hold of my When I was a kid, my family attended the First Apostolic Church. It was a Pentecostal church in Centralia, Illinois, a small rural farm town about 64 miles due east of St. Louis, Missouri. Every Sunday at church, I would watch and listen to Reverend Jonathan Urshan get up in front of us and deliver his message. I remember his sermons were long, like 2 hours long. Yeah, 2 full hours, and in typical Pentecostal fashion, he yelled and he screamed through the whole 2 hours. So much so that by the end of the sermon, he wouldn't have a voice. I remember congregants yelling in a language that I didn't recognize. As a child, I thought they were having some type of temper tantrum in the church. It was only in my teenage years when I realized they were actually speaking in tongues and what that meant. I remember congregants going up to the altar and praying. Somebody would touch them or hug them, and all of a sudden they would fall on the floor, and I thought they were having a seizure. I didn't know what in the world was going on. I also remember congregants running up and down the aisles, running around the perimeter of the sanctuary, and as a child, I thought this was just part of going to church, because after all, this was the only church that I had ever been to. It wasn't until later that I was told all of this hoo-ha was one of 2 things. Either the Holy Ghost God, or everything I saw and heard was fake. Now think about that for a second. Either I was absolutely petrified of this religious ghost everybody was talking about, or everything that I was seeing and hearing in church was fake. Either way, it painted a very negative picture for me. A place like that could be quite scary for a child, and it did scare me. Growing up in a Pentecostal church wasn't all that bad, though, like the music, for example. Well, I still remember the music. The music was incredible. I don't remember the church having a choir, but even 50 years later, I do remember Libba Urshan, the pastor's wife, playing the piano. And I vividly still remember Bonnie Ward playing that organ. That duo could raise the roof off that sanctuary. I absolutely loved the music. I still do, in fact. That music has been in me for more than 50 years. That up-tempo, clap your hands, stomp your feet kind of gospel music. When I got old enough to decide whether or not I wanted to go to church, I decided against it. Partly because by that time, I knew I was queer, and that I wouldn't be welcome there if they knew. That was the buzzword back in the 70s and 80s, queer. I also decided not to go to church because through my entire childhood, I watched those same people who seemed to be spiritual to their core every Sunday leave the church and continue their ways as soon as they got out the door. I got married to my son's mother at the age of 19, a mere 15 months after graduating from high school. I was still very impressionable, as many teenagers are, but a spiritual journey wasn't even on my mind at the time. I just wanted to get married, have kids, and try to live a normal life that didn't include being queer. Early on, my wife Rhonda accepted paganism as her preferred religion. She eventually even proclaimed herself to be a witch at one point. If you my ex-wife, you would know. Now let's just say that for years, my dad told me, if Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So I generally went along with whatever I wanted. But instead of embracing paganism alongside her, I just didn't embrace anything spiritual myself. So now let's fast forward 12 and a half years to the time period of my divorce. Deep down inside, I felt a spiritual calling, but I also knew I wouldn't be welcome anywhere, because that's what society was saying to me at the time, and that's what society wanted me to believe at the time. Remember, this was back in the 70s and 80s. I tried out a Metropolitan Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia. MCC is an international LGBT confirming denomination, founded in 1968, a time when Christian attitudes toward homosexuality were almost universally unfavorable. Reverend Troy Perry founded MCC as a place for the LGBT community to be able to worship God safely. I attended MCC Atlanta a few times and unfortunately learned that gay men can't behave themselves, even in the church. So I tried a Pentecostal church in Atlanta, but I left in the middle of a sermon about homosexuals being cast down with the sodomites. I tried a Southern Baptist church in Atlanta, but I left in the middle of yet another homosexual hating sermon. One day I was talking with a heterosexual African-American friend of mine about missing the music from my childhood church. He said, "Why don't you come to my church? We rock the house with our music." So I went once, and I never went back. I didn't go back because one of the deacons came up to me and my friend and asked if we were together. I knew exactly what he was asking, but I sarcastically replied anyway, "Well, you see that we're sitting here next to each other, so I guess one could say that we're together. Now, if you're asking if we're together, no, we're not." And he replied, "Good, because we don't play that game here." Now, back in the day, when I had a volcanic temper, I would fly off the handle in an instant, people. In an instant. But this wasn't the time, and this wasn't the place. So I just chose not to go back. I tried a couple more churches in the Atlanta area, but again, this was probably 25 years ago or so, and things were much different than they are now. People overtly spoke of homosexuality as if it was a sentence to hell. They still do in some places, but I have noticed a big difference. We've made a lot of progress. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go, but I do believe that we're moving in the right direction. I couldn't find a spiritual home where I felt comfortable, so I stopped going to church altogether. Instead, I decided I would watch church on television. What was I thinking? I remember watching the coverage of Matthew Shepard, a 22-year-old student from the University of Wyoming who was beaten, tortured, tied to a fence post in near freezing temperatures, and left to die near Laramie on the night of October 6, 1998, all because he was gay. I saw the antics of Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church on full display at Matthew's funeral. I heard their hateful words, and I read their hateful signs. And I remember thinking, how can people have so much hate in their hearts? They didn't even know him. They hated him simply because he was gay. That's the only reason. I watched on Sundays Pat Robertson spew anti-gay venom. I remember the anti-gay speeches and sermons by Jerry Falwell, Oral Roberts, Jimmy Swaggart. I remember evangelists like Robert Copeland and the crumbling of his kingdom because of fraud and scams. And I watched the most famous of them all, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, fall from grace because of affairs, fraud, and scams. If this is what spirituality was, I was so much better off without it. Although I was a nut by now, all this gay stuff was still very new to me. Remember back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was no internet. There was no education about homosexuality. There was no real support system for homosexuals either. Where could a gay man go to worship God feel safe, and feel welcome. Back then, there was nowhere. What I was looking for didn't exist. So I gave up on spirituality once again, for many years. Then, in 2010, it happened. I was laid off from my job, and for the life of me, for 2 years, I could not find another one. I had depleted my savings account. My 401k was gone. I had sold everything I had of value just to pay the essential bills. And at the age of 47, I was facing having to move back in with my mother. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved and still love my mother. At 86 years old, I love her to death. But living with her in my late 40s just was not an option for me. In mid-2012, 2 years after losing my job, I finally landed a job as a general manager of an attraction in Orlando, Florida. I finally had a job after feverishly looking for one for 2 years. The job lasted 7 weeks, and it was literally killing me. The venue opened every day at 10 a.m., and so I had to be there at 9 to get things ready. It closed at 2 a.m., so I was generally there until 2:30, closing everything down. Now, if you're a numbers person, and you're calculating that, 9 a.m. till 2:30 a.m. is 17 and a half hours every single day. The owner wouldn't let me hire anyone. In fact, in my first week there, I was directed to downsize by a fourth. So I went in 1 week from 40 staffers down to 30, and my salaried leadership team had to make up the hours, and of course, at the same day. But I had been unemployed for 2 years, and I was broke. What could I do? I needed this job. I got sick during work week 3 or 4, and because I wasn't eating right and hardly getting any sleep, I could not shake whatever this was that I had. This went on until week 7, when one of my bartenders came up one morning, and he said, "Boss, you need to get out of here and go take care of yourself. You're no good to us like this. We can close up tonight without you. Go home and get some sleep and get better." He was trustworthy. Heck, I would have trusted him with anything. So I left him my keys and I went home. I truly thought I was going to have to go to the hospital, but at the time, I didn't have any medical insurance. So I decided to just go to bed, and when I woke up, I would deal with whatever life had in store for me that day. Well, after a few hours, I got a call from the owner of the venue, literally yelling at me for leaving the venue unattended. He told me he was at the venue and we needed to talk. I tried to explain to him how I felt and that I could barely even get out of bed, but he wasn't having any of that. But this, again, I had been unemployed for 2 years and I was broke. I had to have this job. So hacking, coughing, and somewhat delirious, I drove back to the venue. I was yelled at, cursed at, and threatened with being fired. I stood there and took it because I didn't have a choice. He went on to tell me that I was incompetent. Now, he could say a lot of things about me that may have been true, but I was far from incompetent. I had had enough, so I quit. I walked out to my car, opened the door, and just sat there in the car. And I still, 12 years later, vividly remember what happened in that car. I remember thinking, what have I done? What am I thinking? I had no money at the time. I was behind on everything. Rent, car payment, student loan payments. Florida Power and Light were threatening to cut off my electricity. It seemed that everybody wanted a piece of me, or a piece of my wallet. I sat in the car and broke down in an uncontrollable sob. I literally could not stop this deep, heavy sobbing. And I gotta be honest with you, I did sit there thinking thinking about all the different ways that I could end my life. I couldn't deal with another 2-year-long job search. I couldn't deal with another creditor calling me on the phone. I couldn't deal with calling my sister Kathy and asking her for more money. She had already tapped into her home equity line of credit twice for me. So after what seemed like hours of uncontrollable sobbing, but was really probably just a few minutes, I simply looked up at the sky and I said, Lord, I need your help. I'm sorry for only coming to you when I need something, but I've tried to do this by myself and I just can't. I'm exhausted. I need you to take the wheel. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I am one who's always in control. I don't give up control easily, but as I said, I was exhausted. Now, there's typically a catalyst or a trigger when people find God. And this was mine. This day, at this time, in this place, was my catalyst. After gaining my composure, I started my car, and as clear as I am standing here in front of you today, Carrie Underwood's song, Jesus Take the Wheel, was playing on the radio. I kid you not. As I sat there and listened to that song, an extreme feeling of calm and comfort came over me. I felt something sweep by me in that car, and even though the windows were rolled up, I was sitting still. It wasn't a cold breeze, it wasn't a warm breeze, it really didn't feel like a breeze at all, actually. It's difficult for me to explain exactly what I felt, but I can tell you one thing, it was an overwhelming feeling of calm. Everything was calm. It felt as if someone or something was saying, I got you. I'm convinced that God was in that car with me that day. Some people try to convince us that God doesn't exist, but I know He does. I know it deep down with every ounce of my being. God exists. Because of what I experienced on that day, at that moment, in that car, I believe God exists. And nobody will ever convince me otherwise. My God is real. I believe He was with me that day. And I believe that He was sitting in that car with me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid to myself. I believe that God looked at me and He said, oh, nay, Jerry, this is not how I work. I am not done with you yet. I need you just as much as you need me. Others may have thought, Jerry, you're no good. They may have cast me aside. They may have thrown me out like a snotty Kleenex. But not my God. He needed me just as much as I needed Him. I believe He heard my cry for help that day. I believe that indescribable wave that swept through my car that morning was God Almighty. I believe He took me in His arms and He held me tight and He said, Jerry, I got you. And it was that day when I knew I had to start my spiritual journey. I'm going to say that again. It was that day, church, when I knew I had to restart my spiritual journey. I went home and I slept for almost 18 hours. When I woke up, I obviously did not feel 100%, but even my being sick had somehow taken a dramatic turn toward the better. So I started the grueling task of looking for a job again, and within just a few minutes, a listing popped up that I felt I was qualified for. I applied for it, and after 4 days and 3 interviews, I was offered the job. And just like that, I was employed again. And I worked with that company for almost 10 years. God sent me that job, and nobody will ever make me believe that he didn't.
Amen.
You know, I saw a post on Facebook just this past week that I thought was perfect in describing my spiritual journey. The post read, "I have given God 1,000,000 reasons to not love me, and not one of them has changed his mind." During the next couple of years, I visited church after church after church. Finally, in 2014, I found the Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C. I joined the MCC DC Choir. I helped with the soundboard from time to time. I handled the live stream camera every Sunday. On Sunday, February 22nd, 2015, which just so happened to be my 50th birthday also, Reverend Kathy Alexander baptized me at the Metropolitan Community Church. Shortly after that, my company moved me to Key West, Florida, and I had to leave MCCDC. The search for a church that would accept me began again. And again, I went to several. Many of those churches claimed to be accepting of everyone, but the content of their sermons proved otherwise. Then I met Joel, and very early on, we talked quite a bit about our spirituality and decided that once he arrived here in the U.S., we would search for a church together. And in 2018, Joel came here, and together we began almost immediately searching for a spiritual home. We knew it would be a challenge. After all, in many people's eyes, we have 3 strikes against us. We're gay, we're interracial, and he's 16 years my junior. 3 years passed, along with about a dozen other churches, when Florence Aguinaldo, who worked with Joel at Tufts Medical Center, invited us to Good Shepherd. She praised the church and told Joel, even our pastor is gay. I remember thinking, girl, maybe the pastor doesn't want you telling her business up in here. But then I met Pastor Izzy, and the first time I saw her, she had her "Nobody Knows I'm Gay" rainbow coffee cup in her hand. And I knew I had found a home. Joel and I came to Good Shepherd the first time on July 11th, 2021. Florence was here that day, and she introduced us to now what I call the welcome team, or the huggers. And as you've all heard me say many, many times, Carol Davidson walked up to us, threw her arms around us, and I'll never forget the simple 4 words she said to us. You are welcome here. And I will tell you, we have never felt anything but welcome and loved in this place. That's why I get up every Sunday morning and drive 45 minutes to get here. This church, this one right here. Sure, there are plenty of churches in Nashville, New Hampshire, and there may even be a few that would truly accept us, who knows. But this is the church where we are thriving. So this is the church where we will be driving. I made that up. You like that? I enjoy getting up here every Sunday and telling people, no matter your age, your skin color, your financial status, your political affiliation, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, you are welcome in this place. For many of us who think we're different, we need to hear that. We need to see it in person. We need to feel it. And here in this place, we do. And we thank you all for that. And we love you all for that. Now, in closing, I want to direct a quick minute or two to our recent graduates. First, congratulations on your graduation. This is an exciting milestone in your life. And whether you're leaving elementary school, middle school, high school, or college, I'm here to offer just one little tidbit of advice as you turn the page to a new chapter of your life. It's almost a certainty that you will feel overwhelmed at times as life throws everything it has at you. I did. Sometimes you're going to feel as if you don't know what to do. I did. Sometimes you're going to feel like giving up. I did. Sometimes you may even forget who you can turn to for help or guidance or just a hug. I did. But it's okay to say, Lord, I need your help. I can't do this by myself. I'm exhausted, and I need you to take the wheel. I did, and it changed my life. And if you don't hear anything else I've said today, please hear this. Always know that your family here at Good Shepherd United Methodist Church is here for you. You will always be welcome here. And you will always be loved here.